Hello everyone, I am Crawlers and today I thought I'd like to make a video on sort of a little bit of tank history during the course of the First World War. Now, I don't pretend to make myself out to be an expert on history or this topic, but here I thought I'd just show you some of the main points on, tanks from what the time period was. Why? Well, because obviously Battlefield 1 will have some of the earlier tank models, and I thought it'd be fun and interesting to consider just what happened in that time period. Now, obviously, the first tanks appeared during the First World War. These were gigantic, slow, lumbering machines with multiple turrets and, had several men operating them. The first to come up with the concept of a tank were the British, actually, and it was pretty interesting because in order to make these new, possibly history-changing machines, not exciting enough for Germans, for the German intelligence, the British counterintelligence called them tanks, like, fuel tanks or something like that. Well, and as we all know by now, the name stuck. And here's another interesting bit of historical trivia for you guys. Um, since the British came up with the concept of tanks, they also came up with the concept of different types of tanks and armament on them, and called these tanks male and female. Now, the males of the bunch were sporting the 6-pounder guns, pardon the pun, while the female variants only had the Vickers machine guns. You can see under the, not only because it has machine guns, but also under the sponson or the protrusion that the machine guns sit in, you also see the hatch or the doors that you can get into the tank with. And the male tanks obviously didn't have these as their sponsons were, pardon the pun, bigger and, had a bigger gun in them. Now, the theory here was quite correctly deduced by Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Swinton that tanks armed with only cannons would be unable to defend themselves against infantry, and this was quite clearly demonstrated in World War II later when Germans, with the German Elephant tank destroyer that didn't have any defensive armament going into Kursk, and Russian infantry basically had their way with them, until the defensive machine gun was added. So in World War One, these were paired up. The male and the female tanks were for, mutual defense. And I'm sure you can guess why the male tanks were called that. I mean, it isn't mom's spaghetti, I'll tell you that. It's penis. Yes, the damn cannons looked like a penis. There, I said it. And the female tanks weren't a metaphor for anything, you know, for any off-the-cuff joke. They were just called that because they were the opposite of a male tank. And in a quintessentially British move, the tank that led to all these modifications, the original tank, was nicknamed Mother. And ironically, by the new designation, Mother became the male tank. Now, this gets weirder still. In 1918, it was decided that some tanks will be hermaphrodites, or, and kids don't Google this one, but basically the idea was that a tank have both male and female parts, and I mean guns. This particular tank that you're looking at right now is actually a Russian Mark V hermaphrodite tank, and well, you can see that it has female parts because at the time each gun was placed in its own sponson or protrusion from the tank, as you can see on the side. The idea later became impractical with guns getting bigger and bigger, and gradually they required bigger and bigger protrusions or sponsons, and gradually that sponson merged into several turrets of their own, and as guns became even bigger and larger and heavier and had more recoil, the several sponsons or turrets merged into one single turret, and the design, yeah, obviously stuck and is still being used to this day. Now, although the Brits came up with the concept, soon everyone was throwing their own crazy designs into the ring, and from the very small to the ridiculously large. Uh, Russians at one point, well, by then they lagged pretty far behind the West in these things, and instead of starting up from scratch and come up with their new designs, um, they well, rather one crazy concept of the extreme was the Tsar tank that was suggested hilariously. It was presented to Tsar Nicholas himself, and the thing had 27-foot diameter wheels, and after moving a few meters, got permanently stuck in a ditch because at the time there wasn't anything big enough there to get this monster out. Russians did purchase a bunch of Renault FT tanks from the French because, you know, later even manufacturing them themselves under license, I believe, and using them in the Revolutionary War. But arguably the best purchase that they made later on was the chassis, the suspension that was made by an American engineer named Christie, which was this incredibly speedy and maneuverable for the time. It increased the tank's speed like 3 times, which was obviously taken advantage of when building arguably the best tank at the time, the T-34. And these were incredible machines during World War One. I mean, all metal, protected certainly against most small arms, from all sides. And man, when the Brits unleashed these things on the Germans, well, they didn't really know what to make of them at first. I mean, um, here you had this huge metal beast rolling at you non-stop, spewing smoke everywhere. You shot at it and it just kind of shrugged everything off. The bullets just kind of pinged off the armor and it kept coming. And man, when it fired, someone died. So really, it was an entirely new concept. And if the Brits did use it right, it could, change the war and possibly end it. So why didn't it? Well, several reasons, mainly because of bad concept and tactics. The British were using these tanks as uh, vehicles to support the troops. They used them in single numbers spread out among a wide front. And, obviously one tank isn't going to make a hell of a lot of difference, even if it was armored, particularly if it got knocked out. And that brings me to my second point. These weren't Ferraris. They were super slow, lumbering, and entirely too heavy for their engines at the time. Metal beasts that more or less stalled when it came to climbing a small hill. And the British tanks were about as lethal for, actually, the German tanks later on too, were about as lethal for the crew, if not more so than for the enemy, because, they were stiflingly hot inside. Um, they filled with smoke and heat from the engine. The crew actually had to jump out of it on the battlefield to take a breath. Sometimes because they were quite literally suffocating inside. And you can probably guess what happened to that crew at that point. Side note, by the way, Battlefield 1 trailer had what looks like to be a British Mark V heavy tank. And another side note, because the tank drivers and such sat at a somewhat open slot to see the road ahead of them, they wore these masks called splatter masks, and to keep the debris and stuff flying into their face when they were driving and peering out of the tank. But still, although the idea was in its infancy then, the potential for mass killing was there, and the Germans realized it, though at first they were slow to accept it and actually come out with their own creations. But by 1917, Germans actually got their hands on first captured British tanks, and while they copied and adapted the designs, they remained heavy, huge, lumbering and unwieldy. And the only German creation that made it to World War One action was the A7V Sturmpanzerwagen, of which only 20 were built. So here you can see a cutaway of the thing, and see how the crew did its thing inside, and how everything was positioned. And since supposedly Battlefield 1 tanks will be large enough to fit an entire squad, you can kind of see how big a squad would have to be in the game in order to, fit into the tank. Now, what the Germans did capitalize on, though, where the British really couldn't, was the tactics. The Germans saw that the ineffectual use of tanks by the British in World War One, and understood that the tanks could not be used in a single numbers, far spread out from each other over the battlefield as, troop support vehicles, that they could be used as an attack vehicle of their own. So, ironically, the basic concept of Blitzkrieg on they based the concept of Blitzkrieg rather on British Major General Fuller's plans, which were then never used because of the blockade of Germany by that time. But Germans surely made use of it. After World War One, Germans had 20 years to refine those tactics and eventually shoved these newly created machines up the road's collective anus in Poland and France and other countries later on. They concentrated tanks in armored units by themselves that could punch a hole into the enemy's defenses quickly and overwhelm them, causing so much confusion and death that the infantry following them had their work cut out of them, and disrupt the communications behind enemy lines. Needless to say, these tactics worked. So thanks for watching. Please rate and share this video as it helps my channel grow. Check out my other videos at the end of this one, and remember, in Soviet Russia, YouTube subscribes you.